Good afternoon and welcome to today's Facebook Live session. Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. It is so hard to believe that the last time we saw each other in person was 8 months ago and we are now already at the end of the year and you are so close to being at the end of your FRK 201 journey. As of today, you officially have 3 weeks of preparation before you will sit down and write your FRK 201 exam. So I just wanted to kind of come on and give you a bit of advice as to how you should be treating the next 3 weeks. You should be starting with your preparation today. I know we are not finished with lectures yet, and your other subjects also are not necessarily finished with lectures yet, but it is so important that you utilize all of the time you have, and that means that you start revising now. You start revising today. You have 3 weeks, that is 21 days, and you are being tested on the entire year's worth of work for FRK 201. That is a lot of topics that need to be covered in 21 days if you haven't already started. So my suggestion is that you start working today. You've put together a study schedule, all right, and you should cover one topic of FRK each and every day. And where do you start? Because there are a lot of topics. So I would always start with the topics that I am most unsure of. Those topics that I struggle with the most, and those topics that are new to you, all right? Because the newer topics are topics that you haven't been practicing for the last 8-9 months, and therefore you may need to practice them a little bit more in order to grasp the concepts. When you study, it's important that you use your IFRS as your main source. You need to study from your IFRS. You need to practice questions because after all, practice does make perfect. When you are practicing your questions, if there is something that you do not understand, it's important that you don't immediately go and look at the memo. Because when you look at the memo, what do? You look at it and you say, oh yeah, I would have 100% done that in a test. And probability is you wouldn't have, okay? You wouldn't have known where to start. So it's important that where you are unsure or you don't know what to do with a piece of information, you need to go and consult your IFRS. Because at the end of the day, the IFRS is what you can take in with you to your exam, it's what you will take in with you next year to your exam, and ultimately it is the only source that you have available to you when you write your ITC. So it is so important that you are able to consult your IFRS and find your guidance and your answers in your IFRS. Right. What's also important is that in the next 3 weeks, you may not be sitting in the position that you want to be sitting in, but it is so important that you don't stress yourself out, okay? You need to stay calm. There is always the possibility that you are going to pass, even if you are not necessarily in the position where you are passing at the moment. You have to keep faith and you need to work hard in order to achieve your ultimate goal, which is to pass FRK 201. And then if you are unsure about anything, please consult, all right? We are available to you via email. You can also post your questions on the FRK 201 group on Facebook. If there is a concept that you want explained and email just isn't working for you, you just need to pop us an email and say, please, I'd like to consult, but this whole email thing isn't working for me. Can we please have telephonic consultation or a Google Meet? We have been doing that for students that ask. We just need you to approach us and ask. We don't know that you are struggling unless you come to us and tell us. After all, there are 468 of you and there are only 4 of us. So please, if you are struggling, if you need help, if you need a little bit of motivation, please get a hold of us and we will assist you in the best way that we can. And then I know that this has been a long year. It's been a super long year for all of us and we are just ready for it to be 2021. You have 3 weeks left. Push as hard as you can, all right? It's important that you push as hard as you can, but you also rest, okay? It doesn't help to be studying for 24 hours a day. You need to give your brain and your mind and your body a rest. So that means have dinner, spend an hour watching TV with your family, go exercise. It's so important that you keep yourself healthy in the next 3 weeks while you are preparing, okay? And then once these 3 weeks are done, once 15th of December hits, you can rest for the next 3-4 months. You've got a super long holiday to rest and recuperate. So it is just so important that you give it your all in these next 3 weeks. Now, I know that it has been a really long year and you may be lacking motivation at this point in time. So at the end of this Facebook Live, I've put in a nice little motivational clip that I used to watch every now and again during my university career, just to kind of give me that extra motivation when I needed it. So on that note, let's get started with today's Facebook Live. In today's Facebook Live, I'm just going to look at bits and pieces of questions from your integrated questions pack 4. And then you will have noted that on the Facebook group, I have been putting on frequently asked questions that we are getting via email. So if you have a question, you don't want to email us, first maybe go and look at the Facebook group, see if maybe the answer is already sitting there. If not, please then email us. We are there for you. And then next week, we will be having another Facebook Live, and we may look at tackling an old exam paper. On that note, let's get started. We will now be looking at question 3 within your integrated questions pack 4. This question has 3 different requireds, all relating to the same pieces of information. So the first required states, in terms of IAS 1, presentation of financial statements, when would an entity not prepare their financial statements on the going concern basis? Requirement B asks us to discuss, in terms of IAS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, how Diamond Limited should treat the refurbishment costs on the 31st of December 2014. And then the last required asks us to discuss, in terms of IAS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, whether Diamond Limited should have recognized a provision on the 31st of December 2014 for the 2.1 billion rand loss which is expected in the 2015 financial year. And there is a note there that asks us not to provide the definitions of a liability and the definition of a provision. Very importantly, reading that little note is important because there you are often told, where do you need to round to? Do you need to discuss the definition of a provision? Do you need to discuss the definition of a liability? So it's really important that you don't skip over what's written in those notes. So here you are asked not to provide the definition of a liability and a provision, which makes sense because this requirement C is only for 2 marks and the definition of a liability and provision is more than 2 marks. So please do not go and waste your time by discussing the definition of a liability and the definition of a provision because we won't mark it. You are the financial manager of Diamond Limited. Diamond Limited is the world's leading diamond producer and is listed on the mining sector of the JSE Limited. The company has a 31 December reporting date. On the 1st of October 2014, the Chief Executive Officer of Diamond Limited announced publicly the directors plan to sell the Lightkim mine, including the mining machinery. This was widely anticipated in the market after the company experienced a protracted strike by employees. In the announcement, Diamond Limited stated that before any sale of the Lightkim mine could occur, all of the mining machinery will need to be fully refurbished. The total present value of the cost of the refurbishment was estimated as 1.25 million by suitably qualified experts. On the 31st of December 2014, Diamond Limited had not yet appointed a contractor to refurbish this machinery. Government, shareholder, and union approval is required before any decision to sell the mine can be finalized, and this is in the early stage of discussion and negotiation. On 1 March 2015, when the financial statements of Diamond Limited for the year ended 31 December 2014 were authorized for issue by the Board of Directors, the CEO of Diamond Limited released the following statement. As expected, Diamond Limited has experienced a loss for the 2014 financial year after a protracted strike crippled our operations. The main contributor to this loss is a 1.64 billion rand cost of sales figure, which represents an increase of approximately 40% from the previous financial year. Upon closer investigation of the accurate and reliable accounting records, you discovered that the main reason for the increase in cost of sales is the under-recovery of fixed production overhead costs. In his statement, the CEO further stated that Diamond Limited expected to continue operating at a loss in the 2015 financial year as a consequence of the 2014 strike. The expected loss is estimated to be 2.1 billion rand for the 2015 financial year. You were able to verify that this loss was more likely than not to occur. Let's first take a look at Requirement A. Just to remind you, Requirement A asked us when would an entity not prepare their financial statements on a going concern basis in terms of IAS 1, presentation of financial statements. Now, if you go to your IAS 1 in IFRS, paragraph 25 talks about the going concern. And paragraph 25 states that when preparing financial statements, management shall make an assessment of an entity's ability to continue as a going concern. In the second sentence, it then says, an entity shall prepare financial statements on a going concern basis unless management either intends to liquidate the entity or to cease trading or has no realistic alternative but to do so. You can literally write that sentence in your answer and then you get 1.5 marks. In the memorandum, we stated, an entity shall prepare financial statements on a going concern basis unless, meaning in these circumstances we will not prepare the financial statements on the going concern basis, if management intends to liquidate the entity, if management intends to cease trading, or if management has no realistic alternative but to either liquidate or to cease trading. If we then move on to Requirement B, Requirement B asked us to discuss in terms of IAS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, how Diamond Limited should treat the refurbishment costs on the 31st of December 2014. Now, just to refresh your memory, if we sell the Lightchem mine, we are then obligated to refurbish all of the mining machinery. However, we have not yet, at the end of the financial year, appointed a contractor to refurbish the machinery, and we don't have the government shareholder and union approval to sell the mine because they are still in the early stages of discussion and negotiation with regards to the sale of the mine. Therefore, this is not a present obligation. We are not presently obligated to refurbish the mine as we don't yet know if it is actually going to be sold. We don't know that we are all going to come to an agreement and we are then going to agree to sell this mine. So that means it can't be a provision. Okay, the refurbishment costs cannot be a contingent asset because it's not a possible asset, but it could be a potential contingent liability. And what is the definition of a contingent liability? Well, a contingent liability is a possible obligation that arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events which are not wholly within the control of the entity. That is the theory that you need to provide in order to prove that this is a contingent liability. We need to come to the conclusion, how are these refurbishments costs going to be treated? So it's either a contingent liability or a provision or a contingent asset. We've just said that it cannot be a provision because it is not a present obligation, and it cannot be a contingent asset because it's not an asset, which leaves us with contingent liability. Now we've gone and written the definition. Just by writing the definition in this question, you were awarded 3 marks for that definition. Now we need to go and apply it. And remember, most of your marks lie in the application. So all of those underlined parts of the definition are what we are going to apply. So we need to prove that there is a possible obligation. We need to prove that there is a past event. We need to prove that the existence will be confirmed by the occurrence or non-occurrence of an uncertain future event. We need to prove all of those things by applying. So, only if Diamond Limited does actually decide to go ahead with the sale of the Lightchem mine and they actually engage and contract with a contractor to refurbish the mining equipment, then they will have to incur costs. They haven't done this yet, therefore they don't have a current obligation yet. There is only a possible obligation. These costs, the refurbishment costs, might have to be incurred because we announce that, we have announced that we plan to sell the mine. And when we plan to sell the mine and the mining machinery, the terms of that are that the machinery needs to be refurbished. So the past event is the announcement of the plan to sell. We then need to look at whether we have any existence confirmation and an uncertain future event. So we know that the obligation to pay these refurbishment costs will only be confirmed when we actually enter into an agreement with a contractor to refurbish this machinery. Okay, so that is when we can confirm the existence of the obligation, when we actually enter into a contract or an agreement to get this equipment refurbished. Before we enter into this agreement, we still have the option to change our future actions. We may choose not to sell the mine. We may come to an agreement that we don't want to sell the mine anymore. And if we don't sell the mine, then we do not have to incur these refurbishment costs. So because there is a choice in the matter, you still have the choice to sell or not to sell. That choice leads to an uncertain future event. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. And then lastly, we need to prove that this uncertain future event is not necessarily within the control of the entity. Now, the decision to actually sell the mine, which leads to the decision or the cost to refurbish this asset, is contingent on the company actually being able to find a buyer and having the government, the shareholders, and the trade unions approve the sale of the mine. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen before we actually make a sale. Someone needs to be willing to buy it, and those three parties need to approve the sale. Now, the selling of the mine and the incurring of the refurbishment costs is not wholly under the control of Diamond Limited because there are so many other factors to consider. They may not be able to find a willing buyer. That's not within the control of Diamond Limited. The government may decide, sorry, I don't want you to sell this mine. That's not within the control of Diamond Limited. Diamond Limited cannot control the decisions taken by other people, and therefore it is not wholly within the control of the entity. Now that we have given the theory relating to the definition of a contingent liability and we have applied this definition, we can now conclude that the refurbishment costs do meet the definition of a contingent liability. But we can't stop there because this question didn't ask what do we recognize this as? Is this a contingent liability, a provision, or a contingent asset? This question asked us to discuss the treatment. So how do we treat a contingent liability? Do we recognize a contingent liability? No, we don't. So therefore, the planned refurbishment costs will not be recognized in the annual financial statements for the year ended 31 December 2014. However, a contingent liability note will need to be disclosed in the notes to the financial statements, which outline the nature of the event, its estimated financial effect, and if there is any indication of uncertainties relating to the amount or timing of the cash outflow, as well as whether there is any possibility of there being any reimbursement for the refurbishment costs. So the contingent liability, the refurbishment costs, is not recognized, but it is disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. And then lastly, requirement C asked us to discuss in terms of IAS 37 whether Diamond Limited should have recognized a provision on the 31st of December 2014 for the 2.1 billion rand loss expected in the 2015 financial year, and we were specifically told not to provide the definition of a liability and not to provide the definition of a provision. So if you go and look specifically in your IAS 37 standard, IAS 37 paragraph 63 is very, very, very clear in stating that a provision shall not be recognized for future operating losses. Why? Because future operating losses do not meet the definition of a liability, nor do they meet the general recognition criteria for a provision. Therefore, a provision shall not be recognized for future operating losses. That is your theory. you get 1 mark for stating paragraph 63. You then have to apply it. That then means that the 2.1 billion rand loss that is estimated for the 2015 financial year and will not be incurred until the 2015 financial year cannot be recognized as a provision. That is your 2 marks. So you had a mark for theory and a mark for your application. So because IAS 37 is very clear on the fact that future operating losses will not be recognized as provisions, that is why we did not ask for the entire provision definition, simply because to give you all those marks to prove it when there's a specific paragraph that states that it shall not be recognized
as a provision is just counterproductive. So that was your 2 marks, and that brings us to the end of question 3.
Fail big. Today is the beginning of the rest of your life, so do what you feel passionate about. Take chances. Don't be afraid to fail. There's an old IQ test, was 9 dots, and you had to draw 5 lines with a pencil within these 9 dots without lifting the pencil. The only way to do it was to go outside the box. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Don't be afraid to fail big, to dream big. But remember, dreams without goals are just dreams, and they ultimately fuel disappointment. So have dreams, but have goals. And understand that to achieve these goals, you must apply discipline and consistency. You have to work at it every day. You have to plan every day. Hard work works.